Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. And my name is Alana and I review books. So if that sounds like something that you want to stick around and be a part of, my little book community in which we geek out about books over here, please stick around. I would love to have you. And today's book review is going to be Milkman by Anna Burns. This is going to be a longer book review, I would imagine. My other two book reviews that I've posted, Grove and The Possessed, were a little bit shorter. And it's actually kind of nice every now and then to record a shorter video because editing it isn't going to take an hour and a half plus of my life, right? Yeah. So, but this one, we're going to go back to the longer book reviews. And this book was a bit intimidating to write a book review on because it is, I'm burping, packed with stuff, man. And so we're going to get into all that. So this was not planned. That's giving me immense satisfaction. Us and them was second nature, convenient, familiar, insider. And these words were off the cuff without the strain of having to remember and grapple with massaged phrases or diplomatically correct niceties. This book is going to be fun to review because we're going to talk about in some ways how this book relates to today. Okay, even though it was published in 2018, this book is really referring to 1970s Northern Ireland. So in Milkman by Anna Burns, again, we have another unnamed narrator. I feel like that could be a whole post or a whole video. All the books in my collection and on my shelves that are unnamed narrators. There's a ton. That doesn't bother me, but it's a thing. It's a thing. And so in this particular book, there is a specific reason why people are unnamed. Our narrator is referred to as Middle Sister, and she is coming of age in the 1970s in Northern Ireland during what is called the 30-year upheaval, referred to as the Troubles. And I'm going to paraphrase this a lot and condense it a lot, just for the sake of time. But the Troubles refer to a period of upheaval between Catholic/nationalist minorities, the minority, and the Protestant/Unionist majority in government authorities. The narrator is grappling with how to function in a society that is riddled with violence and conflict, in which paranoia, censorship, and surveillance is the norm, while she's coming of age. So when you're living in a society that is quite suppressive, repressive, how does one seek autonomy and identity when that alone in a certain setting is dangerous? So she ultimately, and why this book is called Milkman, is because she becomes an object of speculation when she attracts the unwanted attention of Milkman. So going back to what I said earlier, why Burns uses the tactic to exclude names in this book. Almost all of the characters are nameless, almost. They are referred to by their status or occupation, such as younger sister, youngest sisters, maybe boyfriend, somebody, mix somebody, oldest friend, etc. She's doing this to amplify the us versus them and the one versus all element of this narrative. When you're in an environment where people are reduced to their affiliations and any nuances within the individual are ignored, people become solely nothing more than their political/religious labels. And on that in and of itself, I could be like, preach, Anna Burns, preach. Because isn't that what's happening today? We're going to get into that a little bit later. Okay, isn't that what's happening today? It's what's happening today. Fight me. It was unanimously understood that when everybody here used the tribal identifiers as us or them, or their religion or our religion, in those early days, those darker of the dark days, there wasn't any time for vocabulary watchdogs or political correctness or self-conscious notions. The whole incident would cause division, would end that much hearkened pull together in order to overcome the enemy state. This is a society or in a time period that is deeply divided. And that division, Anna Burns, I think, does an excellent job showing, is being used by the state for its own purposes. It's easy for the media and governments to use division amongst the people, and often they will stoke that division amongst the people for their own gain. So that division is really, in a lot of ways, manipulated. I'm trying not to break out and preach out here in these streets, okay? In Milkman, people seek to remain comfortable with their own beliefs and live within echo chambers. I just want to throw this book across slap it on the wall, throw it across the room, and be like, you are speaking to the choir. You are speaking my language, Anna Burns, because I love it. I love narratives that bring this kind of stuff to light. Okay, I need to calm down. Getting excited. Here are 2 quotes. That was another no-no. Though as no-no was watching the news about our political problems as relayed by what was considered their manipulative network, not as no-no as reading the wrong newspaper. She didn't want the truth. All she wanted was confirmation of the rumor. So in Milkman, people are being told what to think, and many blindly believe what they are told. I love that she talked about the media's role in this, because there is nothing new under the sun. And I'm going to detour for 2 seconds. Bear with me. It humors me. And in some ways, I think it's a bit arrogant, if I do say so, for people today in society to think that we have improved much. Like we are superior to our predecessors, when really it's the same thing, just packaged differently. Or it's able to be maybe with technological advances or whatever. It's the same cover. It's the different cover on the same book. So that is also why this book has the cover that it has. It's showing that I'm getting ahead of myself. So there is a passage in this book that talks about the sky being blue. Is it really blue? This is why the cover of this book is pink. So middle sister is in her French class, and the teacher is telling her students that the sky is not always blue, yet her students refuse to believe her because they've been told that the sky is blue, period. The sky is blue. It will never be anything other than blue. So for them, they will not acknowledge that the sky could have any other hues in it, or at times completely take on a different hue that is not blue. But middle sister is gazing out the window and is experiencing a moment of awakening. She's like, this sky is not blue at all. It's other colors. And so it became clear as I gazed that there was no blue out there at all. And so, again, we have, harkening back to the media and how Anna Burns talks about how the media, the government, oftentimes the same thing, will put out something that is not accurate. But because it's repeated over and over again, people will believe it. I talked about this in my Catch-22 review. I'm going to have a little bit of story time here. So without giving too much information away, I do like my privacy. I have to occasionally, sometimes frequently, depending on what's currently going on, deal with the media. Sometimes get that final product back and you're like, this isn't what happened. It baffles me that people believe almost anything that will come out on the media and just take it and run with it without even doing any background information. That is, as a person who's experienced it and seen it firsthand, I'm baffled by it. I don't know. That was a detour. That was to the left. Anyway, let's move forward with the book review. So, yeah, it blows my mind how people believe anything that they're told. Anyway, somebody give me a violin. So Milkman, again, this is an environment where the people living within the society have to hide their inner thoughts in order to survive. Any deviation, any sign of individualism, breaking away from this narrative, breaking away from the script is dangerous. Anything that shows that you're thinking too much out of the box is a bad thing. Anything that shows that you're maybe sympathizing or empathizing with the wrong side, that's not good, right? So you have the characters in this novel are extremely paranoid. And through this paranoia, they have become masters at masking. These were paranoid times. These were knife edge times, primal times, with everybody suspicious of everybody. You could have a nice wee conversation with someone here, then go away and think, oh, that was a nice wee unguarded conversation I just had there. Least until you start playing it back in your head later on. It was that people were quick to point fingers, to judge, to add on even in peaceful times. So it would be hard to fathom fingers not getting pointed and words not being added, also being judged in these turbulent times. Just as most people here chose not to say what they meant in order to protect themselves, they could also, at certain moments when they knew their mind was being read, learn to present their topmost mental level to those who were reading it, whilst in the undergrowth of their consciousness, inform themselves privately of what their true thinking was about. And when she's referring to, people reading your mind, it's a metaphorical reading of the mind. You can sometimes tell when somebody's not giving you the whole truth based on facial expressions, tone of voice. You can tell when somebody's withholding something. So that reading of the mind is not literal, right? But also, it is true that even in some totalitarian regimes, authoritarian regimes, in other parts of the world, if you've studied them, the government has been able to convince the population that their mind could be read. If you've read any of or watched any accounts of people who have defected from North Korea, they will put in North Korean homes, there are pictures of the government, the leader, there to make it seem like you're always in surveillance and that if you're thinking the wrong thoughts, they can come and get you. So she's not using hyperbole here. So with that, can you imagine living in such a paranoid state that how do you cope with these tensions? And she does address this. My favorite theme in Milkman was actually the idea of preservation of the self, which is what middle sister is really kind of striving for here. She's 18 years old. I mean, this is a time when people are discovering themselves and they're kind of coming into themselves as young adults. And where do you go from here as you make your way out into, older adulthood? Regardless of the turbulent environment, people have created silos within themselves. There is one thing that no one else can control, and that are your inner thoughts. Regardless of what the exterior is presenting, the inner self can always remain intact and safe. So shiny was bad, and too bad was bad, and too joyous was bad, which meant you had to go around not being anything, also not thinking, which is why everyone kept their private thoughts safe and sound in those recesses underneath. The I am deep in the council chamber. I thought this real me was in there, in charge, hidden from them, but directing from the undergrowth. Some people think that, I think especially today in today's society where people, I will say, in my opinion, overshare on the internet. Actually, it's not just an opinion. If I know people who work in data security. I've had data security trainings. I have to take them for work. I have started one thing I like to research and kind of pay attention to is this ongoing and relatively new discussion online about people's privacy, especially the privacy of minors, and how parents often share way too much about their children before the child can ever consent to having certain things about them shared online because they're not at an age to make that type of decision. When you give away all your information, you have nothing left, right? And so people think that if you don't overshare on the internet and you're not real and raw on the internet, you're phony. Where really there is something to be said about keeping certain things to yourself, because once you give it away, you can't get it back. the internet is forever, or in some cases, let's say pre-internet. Once you share certain things, it's out there. It's been spoken. Somebody else has witnessed it. Someone else has experienced what you're telling them. You have witnessed. You have an alibi. And there is something about keeping certain things to yourself, and no one can tap into your mind, and that actually bothers certain types of government, again, which is why authoritarian regimes, totalitarian regimes will create this fallacy that they can read your thoughts. They can't. But if they think that they can control your inner being, what Anna Burns here is calling the I am, which has a religious connotation in some cases, if you know, you know. When you can tap into that or make people think that that's being tapped into, you have completely stripped the individual away. And again, that is something that is discussed in Catch-22. So I'm going to get into why I keep referring to Catch-22 when I'm talking about this book. So lastly, before I wrap this up, this is getting, we are definitely venturing into the 20 plus minute video. In the midst of the political chaos and the violence, the narrator, again, is still grappling with coming of age. I will never tire of a novel that focuses on the mundane details and questions about existence. That is just, I love an existential novel. I will never get tired of existentialism. I don't consider myself an existentialist, but I love existentialist thought, phenomenology, and all that stuff. I just think it's fascinating because I think that in a way, it knows how to package just the crisis of living in a way that is relatable, I think. That's, I think, why existential narratives are so successful. Just as the political problems here in my maybe relationship with maybe boyfriend, I was coming up with the ambivalences of life. So yes, I am going to start wrapping this video up with my final thoughts on Milkman. I found it to be thought-provoking, as you can, anytime a narrative discusses things like critiques the state, that is willing to critique and discuss the tribalism of human nature and how you get these sides that will just go at each other because they really fundamentally maybe disagree on one issue, but completely ignore the complexities of the individual and say, oh, if you voted for this person, you're automatically this type of person. Or if you voted for that person, then you're that type of person. And we have boiled people down to these categories that just strip the individualism away from a person. You've stripped away everything else that makes them fascinating and unique and deep, right? So anytime a narrative discusses that, I'm here for it. Because that is I refuse to, if you follow me on Instagram, you will notice that I am completely silent on current affairs. I do that on purpose because there's enough of it. I have strong opinions about things, trust me. But I prefer to not get into the back and forth arguing, the name calling, the this, the that. I just refuse to reduce people to that. Even if I maybe come across somebody that I maybe blatantly disagree with on a particular issue, I will not do it because I don't want to get myself into this type of mindset of us versus them. I won't do it. I refuse to reduce another human being who has a complex background and a complex way of thinking and experiences to who they voted for, whether that's the left or the right. I really could care less, right? I refuse to do it, and I refuse to allow the media to manipulate how I think about other people. I won't do it. So that was a bit of a TED Talk. I'm sorry. I'm just really passionate about that because I see it and I think it's really sad. Well, that's kind of what I wrote in my review. I said, we are living in a society that is increasingly becoming more and more divided. Between, again, the vitriol that you see on the internet, it is impossible to avoid the over generalization that has happened in society. based on how people fall on some type of political spectrum. And I think that's the most common, that's probably the biggest divider in today's society, at least in the United States. I'll vouch for that, is demonizing people based on where they fall on the political spectrum, whether it's here or here, right? And I said, oh yeah, that is why actually on Instagram in particular, I almost never scroll through my news feeds. I rarely scroll through my feed. I rarely scroll through my stories because I don't want to engage in that. I just prefer to be a nice human being and treat people the way that I want to be treated. I went off the deep end. So Milkman ultimately uses the Troubles to show the damaging impact that the us versus them has on all people, regardless of what side a person may fall on a spectrum. It's bad for people, right? The community. It tears it apart. And so I really struggle sometimes with how can anybody read a novel like this and not maybe take a deep reflection on themselves. Wow, do I engage in that behavior? Have I ever engaged in that behavior? Is this really happening today? Without pointing fingers. It's very, very difficult to do. It's very difficult to do to sit back and say, man, do I do this myself? So for me, this is a timely novel. This was published in 2018, I believe. 17 or 18? First published in 2018. And I don't know, I think it's one of those novels that deserves to sit right next to Catch-22, 1984, and Fahrenheit 451. Just because she ain't wrong. Also, one reason I think that this novel is not necessarily for everyone is because of the writing style. It is definitely a bit stream of consciousness. And as Anna Burns is Irish, there is quite a bit of Irish dialect / colloquialism in the way that the flow of the writing. There's a style to it that is, if you read this in an Irish accent in your mind, it makes perfect sense. I know some people were frustrated with the writing style, like this is convoluted, it's all what is happening, it makes no sense. Read it in an Irish accent, chef's kiss, it makes perfect sense. I cannot do the Irish accent out loud, but I know what it sounds like in my head, and when I read it in that way, I found it hit the nail on the head. So I have also seen people misclassify this as a dystopian novel. It is not a dystopian novel. It can't be a dystopia if it's referencing something that actually happened. Perhaps that makes it historical fiction. And I wonder if maybe those particular readers just didn't do research and say, what's happening here? What is she referring to? And they just didn't know that the Troubles were a thing. And so they just picked up the novel with no background. I think that if you take 2 seconds to read a few paragraphs on this time period, you don't need to go in depth and watch documentaries. It's not that deep to be able to grasp what Anna Burns is getting at. You'll realize that this is not a dystopia. However, there is something cryptic about the way she's referring to certain elements within the novel or within the setting. And I think that she did that on purpose. There are certain references that you will realize, oh, she's referring to the 1970s. But it's still vague enough that the novel, I get why people have classified it as a dystopia if you don't know what the Troubles were. But she's writing in a way that makes it relevant to any time period. Televisions are mentioned here, right? So if you're not aware of the 1970s during this time period in Northern Ireland, it's going to feel like it's more modern than perhaps the setting actually is. So that's kind of my little sidebar footnote, if you will, addendum, if you will, there. Thank you for sticking around with me with this review. I feel like I was a little bit rambling all over the place, but thank you for putting up with my my ramblings and in some cases my frustrations. I've been frustrated with society these days, especially over the past couple of years, and just the hate. That's just another word for it. The hate, the demonization that I've seen of people othering other people. In my book, no pun intended, anytime you other anybody else for something, that is a bad thing. Othering people in society is a bad thing, whether you agree with what they've done or not. That has led to some very, very bad situations in history. And I've studied them firsthand, so I'm not pulling this out of nowhere, right? Othering people is a bad thing. You can agree to disagree and have a conversation and have nuanced conversations and say, I don't agree with you at all, but I'm going to respect you as a human being and not call you names or threaten violence against you. Yeah, I think that's a good thing. That's the mature thing to do. I gave this book a 4 out of 5. It really resonated with me. I was like, yes, girl, preach. I felt like, I wasn't all by myself in the way that I choose to deal with today's vitriolic world. Yeah. Have you read Milkman? Are you intrigued by Milkman? Now that you have perhaps stumbled across my video, what did you think of the writing style? I know a lot of people who just didn't get on with the writing style. And I think that's fine. It is very Irish, but I love it for that. One side of my family, nothing but Irish last names. So there was actually something in which she was referencing a particular type of food that on one side of my family, they eat. And I didn't know that was traditionally an Irish dish. But it would make sense. There was some Irish ancestry on one side of my family. And I shared that with one of my parents, and they were like, no way, I didn't know that. I thought it was Southern. And they're like, no, it came from Ireland. So I that made me chuckle. I felt a little bit of kinship there. Yeah, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm rambling. Thank you for taking the time to stick with this video. How do you feel about the chaos in today's society? Do you just feel overwhelmed and just wish people would just sit back and stop fighting, arguing? That's how I feel. And turn off the TV. Turn off the news, people. Turn it off. It's not healthy to have that going all the time. Yeah, I'm going to end this here. Thank you for sticking around. Please feel free to like, subscribe, leave me a comment. And if you would like to follow me on Instagram, I'm there. So if you want to follow an Instagram account that stays out of the argument of current affairs, again, I'm very actually aware of what's going on in the world. I just choose to have a space on my little corner of the internet is where people can get away from that and just talk about books and have really good in-depth conversations about books. And perhaps maybe it brings to mind our own state for that we're currently in. And also I like to share funny dog videos and funny relatable memes. So I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye.